Part 2. When you don't have the ideal, things that go wrong. Subheading, when your partner isn't meeting your needs. This phrase, quote, meet my needs, unquote, is very popular in relationship psychology, and I bought into it quite a bit before I was married and for some time after I was married. I remember music and movies and other media encouraging me to find someone who meets my needs, who, quote, completes me, unquote. Many clinicians and self-help books will actually encourage spouses to have a sit-down and make a list of needs they want the other person to meet for them. This activity tends to lead to a great deal of resentment because quite often the spouse does not fulfill the expectation even after a long emotional conversation on the topic. Why does trying to get someone else to meet my needs cause so many problems? What do we do instead? Quite often, when we choose a spouse, it may not be one of the personality characteristics we put on our, quote, what am I looking for in a spouse, unquote, list, but accidentally we tend to look for someone who is motivated in personal improvement. We also tend to look for someone who has a pattern of working hard to fulfill their stewardships. Both of these characteristics are very attractive. Ironically, although we married someone who was, quote, doing all they could, unquote, to be the best person they could be before we met them, without any help or motivation from us, after the honeymoon phase of the relationship, we begin to notice things about them that are insufficient. Because these insufficiencies are inconvenient, disappointing, frustrating, we try to be, quote, helpful, unquote, by pointing them out to our loved one. At first we do so kindly, but after a while, when they don't get the hint, we increase the intensity with which we communicate, like you would with any child, right? Feel the sarcasm? Why do we do this? Because we accidentally think that they have all sorts of leftover energy, because they haven't given it their all. And we can tell because we watch them so closely to see what they are doing wrong, how they can spend their time more wisely like us, etc. When things get even more painful, one can conclude that the other person is intentionally not meeting my needs. Referring to another Shel Silverstein book, The Missing Piece, we find more great wisdom. One of the main themes of this book is to avoid looking for others to meet your needs. He recommends you become a complete person, able to meet all of your own basic needs before you enter a relationship. This is a good goal, but each of us would be very light in life if we waited that long to be complete enough to bring a spouse into our lives. Instead, I recommend retaining one of the skills or attitudes we each had before we got married. Before we got married, we held ourselves responsible for doing what it takes to make ourselves happy enough, and when we had an unmet need, we learned to deal with it, with our own resources instead of expecting someone else to resolve it for us. As I have gotten to know many individuals, my reference for the complex developmental process of each person continues to rise. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of large and small developmental issues each of us will need to work on in this lifetime. The process of prioritizing which issue to work on next requires the wisdom of a God. The workload involved in each person's improvement is more than one can handle on their own. Who are we to interrupt this difficult and meticulous process our spouse is going through, just so our lives will be easier if they would just change? Imagine saying the following in prayer. Dear God, I want to thank you for the work you have done to make my spouse such a wonderful person, but there are still a few areas that need some work. Perhaps you are having a hard time seeing some of his or her weaknesses. Perhaps you don't have the skill to fix him or her. Perhaps you don't understand how serious the problem is. Perhaps you aren't aware of how my spouse is not meeting my needs. Perhaps my spouse just isn't very good at listening to you. I have done such a good job of fixing myself that I find I have some extra time to spare, so I have decided that I will help my partner figure out what they need to fix and strategize ways for them to fix it, even if they don't ask for my help. You see, many of my partner's behaviors are very inconvenient for me, and I would like them to be different. I am pretty sure I can see all of my spouse's weaknesses, and I can prioritize them in the order necessary for good evolution. So I will go ahead and point these out to my partner, because you don't seem to be doing so clearly enough, or fast enough, and probably don't have the time. Does that prayer sound crazy to anyone? I call it the blasphemous prayer. In more than one scripture, Christ referred to this mentality. He said in 3 Nephi 14:3-5, And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, Let me pull the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast the mote out of thy brother's eye. It has been my experience that it takes a lifetime to find and remove all the beams in my own eye, so it will be a while before I start attending to hers. I could go on and on with this subject, but but for now, let me summarize. I am sad when we experience times in our lives when we feel that our needs are going unmet. I am sad when our culture trains us to believe that our spouse is responsible for meeting our needs. I invite you to ask your partner, do you feel maxed out? Do you feel like you're doing all you can do? Be very careful. Make sure you ask these questions with sincerity and not with negative emotion. And if they say yes, and they know that they are still dropping the ball in many areas of their lives, I implore you, please remember what it feels like to be doing all you can do and being aware that it is not enough. This is a devastating experience, and if it wasn't for the atonement, each of us could be crushed by the regular awareness of our inadequacies. I will talk more on this later. Please show your partner compassion as you would hope they would show you. It is hard work to be your spouse and to fulfill the stewardships they have and fight all the battles with Satan they have. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Be patient and encouraging with your spouse's developmental process, as you would want them to be with yours. Do not rely on them if they have yet to gain strength in that area. Go to the source of all wisdom and strength when your spouse is insufficient. This act of love will do more for you and your partner than any, quote, meet my needs, unquote, conversation you could have. If your spouse is hurting you and not just being insufficient, I will address that issue later. Important differences between men and women. I met a couple that had several issues, but one of the main problems was that she was hoping he would be more like a woman, and he was hoping she would be more like a man. I am sad that this is a common problem that surfaces in the modern day as members of society push for things to be fair and equal between men and women. Not validating important differences between men and women can cause problems in a relationship for a very long time. In this relationship, she described him as unrepentant because he refused to let go of his, quote, risk-taking, unquote, mentality and behavior. He was frustrated with her because she was, quote, boring, unquote. As she became a nag, emotionally encouraging him to behave more safely, he withdrew from her because he felt insulted. Let's go back to the origin of male and female differences based on the revelations from prophets instead of the guesses of scientists. We are told in The Family, A Proclamation to the World, quote, gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose, unquote. This inspired document goes on to say, quote, by divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. Mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children, unquote. A question I began to consider as a psychology professional was, quote, what functional patterns are deeply ingrained in men and women that help them to succeed in their stewardships, and how can I explain those differences to my clients, unquote. I like to go back to the cavemen days to explain. Darwin would say these differences were developed over time, but doctrine tells us these differences are probably given to us by God. What did it take for men to be successful in caveman days, and many centuries thereafter, at fulfilling their stewardships to preside, provide, and protect? Specifically with respect to the, quote, protect, unquote, portion of their stewardship. For most of their history of the world, men have needed to be in some very dangerous situations. Not only have these situations been dangerous, they have also been uncomfortable. I think of war-type situations like Vietnam, or the Crusades, or World War II. About any military situation will do. I imagine how silly it would be if the leader of a group of warriors asked his men, quote, how do you feel about running into that forest and getting shot at by an enemy you can't see, unquote. Imagine if men's brains prioritized their own safety over their bravery, or stupidity, of running into a forest or any other military situation with the enthusiasm for war. In so many of these situations, it is often mathematically illogical for the man and his team to go against the enemy, but, quote, for their lives and for their wives and for their children, unquote. Mosiah 20:11. They do it anyway. Men have had to decrease their awareness of their own feelings in order to fulfill their stewardships. Quote, do what needs to be done, not what you feel like doing, unquote. After observing this almost universal drive deep inside men, I have come to the conclusion that men, in order to fulfill their stewardships, must prioritize a sense of confidence and competence over their own safety and security. Imagine a man in a military situation that doesn't feel a sense of confidence and competence. If a man does not believe he can succeed, he will not try, and this usually leads to a lot of hurt women and children. So while men are decreasing their emotional sensitivities over thousands of years so they don't feel badly about killing people in order to protect their families, women have been doing almost the exact opposite. In order to properly nurture children, women need to have a safe and secure environment. Going all the way back to caveman days and many centuries after that, being in love with a man was not a very wise way to pick a husband. There were so many dangers that it was more important for a woman to find a man that would keep her and her children safe and secure, and that he had the confidence and competence to do so. In order for a woman to correctly nurture her children, she has been increasing her sensitivities for thousands of years. An insatiable craving to create a perfect environment for nurturing has been within women from the beginning of time. In modern times, with modern revelation, women have more information on how to go about doing this and what it is to look like when accomplished. Quote, "Why can't our home be more like a temple?" Unquote. So many comments that come out of the mouths of women have the man thinking she wants everything to be, quote, perfect, unquote. It is as if she has an insatiable drive to celestialize everything. I call this drive, quote, celestial orientation, unquote. Every woman I have met has it. Every woman I have met feels inadequate in her ability to acquire it. And almost all of the women I work with are confused as to why the man isn't as driven as she is to create it. In fact, many men, either in their heads or out of their mouths, say the phrase, quote, "Woman, why can't you lower your standards?" Unquote. Going back to man psychology, in order to spend months in leech-filled jungles or sand-filled deserts, sleeping near the decaying bodies of friends and enemies, men have needed to become callous to their environment so they can function. It is as if you would be satisfied to live in a dirt floor cave as long as you have a corner to spit in, the woman says or thinks in frustration, and most men respond unconsciously with, "Sounds a whole lot better than where I was living during the last war." One of the mistakes this couple was making was that the husband didn't understand this about himself. He had and has an insatiable craving for the feeling that comes when a man is in a war-type situation. He craves the feeling of intense risk. This man went so far as to take the risk of talking to women he wasn't married to in ways that stimulated thrill in him. Unfortunately, he went too far, and by doing so, he significantly threatened the safety and security of his wife. And when a man is behaving in ways that threaten the safety and security of the woman, she starts to ask him questions designed to increase her safety, like, "What are you going to do different? Why did you do that? Why don't you?" She doesn't trust him anymore. She doesn't have confidence in him, and she doesn't see him as competent, so she treats him accordingly. And what is worse is that he deserves to be treated this way. Solution. The man needs to turn to his core relationship with God. The woman is no longer in a position to be a primary source of rejuvenation. He cannot rely on the arm of flesh. The man will need to get encouragement and rejuvenation and validation from God, and only God. The man needs to protect his family from danger, including his own misbehaviors, whether his wife believes in him or not. He needs to reacquire his personal integrity with God by becoming a confident presider, provider, and protector, whether she treats him that way or not. Men are programmed to fight against resistance. The wife needs to reconnect with her God as well. Although in a celestial world a man is, quote, supposed to, unquote, behave better, sometimes a man does not, and she needs to properly prepare for such circumstances. She also must not, quote, rely on the arm of flesh, unquote. She needs to turn to God for healing, safety, and security. If she worked hard to complete the independent stage of her own development, she learned that with a strong relationship with God, a woman can feel strong, safe, and secure without a man in her life. It may not be ideal, but she can do it, and she will probably need to do this again. She will have to do what the pioneer woman had to do when they had to cross the plains without the help of a man. She needs to remember how strong and smart she is. She needs to remember that she can do it whether he helps her or not. It is within her, and she needs to maintain her dignity while she does it. If both do their part, the man becomes better than ever at providing safety and security for his woman. By getting feedback from his father instead of his wife, he is taught more accurately about what he has done wrong and what needs to be fixed. The woman is more fortified when the two come back together because she has used her relationship with God to help heal her instead of waiting for the man. When the man re-enters her life, she is able to watch him demonstrate new skills without fear. When she sees his new skills at a consistent level, she is able to celebrate them. In other words, when a woman feels safe and secure, her natural tendency to nurture comes to the surface. She would nurture a man who creates a safe and secure environment for her. This nurturing adds to his sense of confidence and competence. Ideally, he uses that increased confidence and competence to get better at providing her with safety and security, while she increases the nurturing, and the cycle continues, making the relationship stronger. Cavemen origins of human sexuality. Before we go much further, let's look at how these principles apply to the bedroom relationships. If we take a close look at how things might have worked back in caveman days, perhaps we can learn things about human sexuality that are more useful than what you might find in a modern Cosmo magazine. Let me introduce you to two cavemen, Ugg and Thug. Each of these men has a different story with a different ending to their story. Ugg will be the hero of this story. Thug will be, well, the thug. Ugg had the advantage of not being contaminated by modern propaganda. We can imagine him waking up in the morning and recognizing that his wife and children are going to be hungry and cold if he doesn't get out of bed and start getting their needs met. So he jumps out of bed and actively begins the process of providing for and protecting his family. See Proclamation on the Family, paragraph 7. He builds a fire and makes sure there is a supply of clean water for his family before he leaves. When his wife wakes up and sees that he is gone, she smiles after seeing what he has done and knows, based on past experience, what he has gone off to do. She has time and opportunity to be grateful for his efforts. Thug, on the other hand, wakes up and thinks about how he feels and what he wants to do, or rather, what he doesn't want to do. Someone told him the secret of happiness is to focus on his feelings and to do what he wants to do. So he notices that he would rather stay in his warm bed than go out in the cold. He notices that going out of the cave to fight, farm, and build will be dangerous and scary, and he doesn't want to. So for the sake of pursuing happiness, he stays in his warm bed. When his wife wakes up, she has to quickly get out of bed in order to build a fire and bring him water and start breakfast before the children wake up. Thug watches her from bed and finds himself sexually stimulated watching her bustle around the cave. He touches her in a playful way and invites her back into bed for a little fun, because he feels like it. He is confused when she is, quote, not in the mood, unquote. Now she has made him grumpy. He decides there is no way he is going to go out into the dangerous world for a woman who makes him feel like that. A long day goes by while Ugg has been away from the cave. While gone, he has chased off several other cavemen who are wandering dangerously close to his cave. He killed one tiger who was working its way into his neighborhood. He killed one mammoth for food for his family. He worked for some time in the garden and some time building a bigger home for his family. All day long, all he could think about was how to better provide for and protect his wife and kids. Almost never did he think about what he wanted or what he felt like doing. Sex hasn't even been on his mind. While he was gone, his wife felt comfortable taking the time to nurture the children, having confidence that her man was going to do all he could to meet their needs. When he came home, he dumped his load of meat and vegetables on the floor for his woman, walked under the nearby waterfall to wash off blood and dirt, and fell into bed after seeing his wife give him a sparkly-eyed smile. Over at Thug's cave, a few hours went by while Thug got more and more frustrated with his wife's nagging. She kept complaining about all the things she didn't have, like food and water and heat. Finally, she left the cave to go get the supplies herself. Now his kids were irritating him. Hours later, she comes back with a side of beef flung over her shoulders, and he finds her sweaty, muscular body to be quite attractive. So he offers her a sexual experience again, and he is confused as to why she declines again. At Ugg's house, his wife puts together a nice dinner, feeds the kids, and quickly gets them off to bed. She hums a tune the whole time and is in a hurry for her kids to go to sleep so she can spend some time with her man. Once they are down, she wakes him up and invites him to dinner. She hasn't had to work too hard, so she is not overly exhausted. She finds herself with extra energy and full of gratitude. She asks herself, how can I show my gratitude? With that thought, she notices warm sensations in warm parts of her body. As her man finishes eating, she initiates a very nurturing experience for her man. When Ugg wakes up the next morning, he finds himself invigorated. He wants to jump out of bed and do the same thing he did yesterday. Thug is confused and unhappy. Why won't his wife meet his needs? Why is she so unpleasant to live with? Why can't she be more like Ugg's wife? He spent his day trying to do things that he felt like doing and that he wanted to do. Why was he not happy? As a clinician, I have learned that I have a significant effect on the sexuality of a wife without even working with her. By working directly with the husband to help him make an attitude more like Ugg's, both the man and the wife start to enjoy greater intimacy, emotional, psychological, and physical. I've also learned that men with a life philosophy similar to Thug's will get the same result that Thug gets. Contrary to modern propaganda, my interviews with hundreds of women have yielded some information that was unexpected, at least for me and most other men I have met. Sex is not about physical pleasure for most women. Sex is not about reaching the big O. Sex for some seems to be about saying thank you. Thank you for being nice. Thank you for making me feel safe and secure. Thank you for making me a priority. Thank you for doing things that are uncomfortable in order to meet my needs and the needs of my children. Yes, many women find the experience physically pleasing if they are feeling grateful. Occasionally, I have found a woman who is not very good at being grateful. Ladies, if your man is trying really hard and is doing a decent job of providing for you and trying to protect you, please be grateful. Gentlemen, it doesn't count if you do good most of the time, and only once in a while you do something that significantly hurts your women. There seems to be a powerful circle of life and love. If he will work to make her feel safe and secure, and she reciprocates with making him feel confident and competent, both feel edified and rejoice together. Both have the strength and desire to do more of the same the next day. The Tetris miscommunication concept. Before I begin talking about how to fix a traumatized relationship, it is very important that you be aware of this communication concept. You will need to understand this concept if we are going to be able to help you heal your traumatized relationship. We have been taught that Satan is invested in ruining relationships, but we do not always sift out exactly how he goes about doing so. As I have studied and observed communication dynamics, an important paradigm can be applied when thinking about the spiritual, both good and evil, factors of human communication. I hope you remember that basic computer game called Tetris. You are given a sequence of different shaped pieces, and you have to move and twist them to fit in the right spot. This is similar to communication between people. Doctrine and Covenants, Section 50, is one of my favorite chapters on human communication. It describes that both the speaker and the listener, quote, rejoice and are edified, unquote, when they communicate using the Holy Spirit. An amazing example of powerful communication takes place every 6 months during General Conference weekend. The speakers invest a lot of effort to make sure the ideas and words they will be sharing are in accordance with the Holy Spirit. This is like a Tetris game that tries to give you the right pieces, the pieces that will help you complete your puzzle and win the game. At the same time, an invested listener will come with the Holy Spirit, prepared to listen carefully to and watch closely the words and ideas shared, and will find ways to, quote, liken, unquote, 2 Nephi, the concepts unto themselves, turn and slide the pieces into the right spot. Many people leave conference weekend with a sensation that many of the talks were written just for them. Interestingly, if asked to quote what they had learned, they will often recall the words a little differently than they were actually spoken. I have experienced this as a therapist. I have many experiences with a client coming back for a follow-up visit, and they have the sensation of edification because of something they heard me say in the last visit. I hear them describe what they heard me say, and I recognize that they are not quite getting it right. It sounds like they have twisted my words in ways that empower and improve their lives. The way I visualize this is that I work hard to find the right pieces to benefit the person I am talking to. My words are not perfect. I may be a little off to the right or a little off of my angle, but the Holy Ghost helps the listener to twist and slide the idea into its most beneficial place. This is very rewarding for both listener and speaker. In the MTC, the missionaries are taught over and over again, quote, if you don't have the Spirit, don't teach, unquote. Let's look at what happens when one or both of the participants have lost the Spirit. Satan is very invested in destroying relationships. Destroying communication is an excellent venue to do so. I didn't know he could do this, but I have seen him try to fight his way into a conversation that started out with the Holy Spirit. We must use the Book of Mormon stories to understand this. Sometimes people think you need to do something wrong in order to invite Satan into a situation. This is not true. Did the Nephites have to do something wrong in order to invite a Lamanite attack? No. Lamanites attack whether the Nephites are righteous or not. Lamanites attack because they are selfish and mean. This is true of Satan and his demons in the modern world. They will attack marriages because they are mean and selfish. You don't have to be a sinner to experience a satanic attack on you or your marriage. I have watched a husband or a wife work very hard to choose the right words to describe a piece of their marital struggles. I have learned to bounce my eyes between the husband and wife in these situations until I see the other spouse have an emotional reaction. I almost always jump in and stop the conversation right then and help the listener catch the satanic attack. In those moments, it is like Satan got a hold of the Tetris puzzle piece. while it was in midair, and he twisted it and slid it to just the wrong place, the place that would cause the most pain for the listener. If you are used to believing how scientists describe these moments, you would hear the scientist say that either the speaker subconsciously wanted to hurt the listener, or the listener subconsciously wanted to take offense. What if both were sincerely trying to get it right, but the 7,000-year-old genius Satan got his hand in the mix and twisted things up? Examples. She says, "I think Bob bought a new car for Susie." He hears, "Why can't you be a better provider?" He says, "There's a toy truck on the floor." She hears, "I hope you learn how to be a good homemaker someday." She says, "Can we talk?" He hears, "She wants to lecture you again." He says, "I like you." She hears, "You just want to have sex again." Solution. Both the husband and the wife will need to increase their spirit of discernment to become more aware of twists in communication like this. The speaker will need to double-check his or her state of being, or spirit, at the time of speaking. As hard as it may sound, the template for the emotional spiritual state of the speaker needs to be as close to what it is described in Doctrine and Covenants, section 121, verses 41 and 42 as possible. To clarify, quote, "No power or influence can or ought to be maintained when talking with one spouse, only by persuasion, by long-suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul without hypocrisy and without guile," unquote. If you check and you suspect that you are not in this state of mind, you have the responsibility to not talk yet. If you don't have the spirit, don't talk. Sarcasm, impatience, codependent, quote, needs, selfishness, etc. make twisting communication really easy for Satan. The speaker will also need to pay attention to times when what he or she says is heard or received differently than expected by the listener. If the speaker is confident that what he or she said was with the intent to edify the situation, then you have to check to see if the listener is ready. It is important that the speaker is more invested in the opportunity to have a quality communication moment than invested in just venting. It is a bonus when one person can just vent while the other just listens, but the listener must be in the right state of mind or spirit as well. If the speaker discerns that the listener is not ready to receive, then it is the responsibility of the speaker to wait. At this moment, I often hear clients respond with, "But what if I really need to say something?" This idea is anchored in previous inaccurate relationship philosophies, like, "You should always have the right to share your feelings." This is not true. Talking, sharing, confronting, dumping, etc. are all highly unlikely to be productive if either the speaker or the listener does not have the spirit. The listener needs to take responsibility for being in the right state of mind, spirit also. The listener will need to work to receive the information in a productive way. The listener will also need to have the discernment to recognize their own emotional reaction to what the speaker is saying. If the listener is unable to maintain or quickly regain the spirit of productive listening, then they need to signal the speaker to pause while the listener regroups. This can take seconds, minutes, or with some couples days, weeks, and sadly even months. If you don't have the spirit, don't listen. Take the responsibility to retreat and regroup. In some cases, the listener has a lot of work to do to heal from the pain of past conversations or to gain sufficient compassion for the speaker before the listener can be stable and strong during difficult conversations. After hearing these instructions, I have had some couples tell me, "If those are the rules, we would never be able to talk to each other." I respond with, "Is that because you can't be in the right state of mind or spirit during conversations, or you don't believe your partner is capable of it?" This usually jolts them a little bit. If communication is going to be productive for both people, each is going to have to take strict responsibility for their own emotional, mental, and spiritual condition. This effort can feel like a war inside each mind, but we have been warned in the last days that there will be wars and rumors of wars, and we will have to sleep on our swords, or in other words, be constantly ready. I am convinced that the spiritual battles within the hearts and minds of each one of us are the fulfillment of this prophecy. This process can take longer than we would prefer as well. Please, I beg of you, do not force communication when either the speaker or the listener is unprepared with spiritual fortitude. It will only lend itself to a satanic attack that leads to pain for one or both of the partners. Love yourself and each other enough to communicate in an edifying way. This concept, of course, only works when both people are invested in the success of the relationship. For me, the listening part is the hardest part. When I have the spirit, I remember that my wife is a good and kind person who really wants to make things work between us. I can be minding my own business and my wife will say the smallest thing. Would you mind helping me with this? And I will have a bizarre emotional reaction. The excessive irate feelings come accompanied by the thought, doesn't she know how busy I am? Or something like that. If I am out of balance, don't have the spirit, I will buy into the thoughts and feelings that enter my system in that moment, and my agitation will increase, thus putting her on eggshells, if not worse. If I catch it before I become unpleasant, and that is my goal every time, I start by addressing Satan. Is that you, Satan, messing with me again? He always responds the same way to me, or nope. This response always shifts my irritation to him and away from my wife. I have discovered that he is always there when things get negatively intense between us. I then ask, are you trying to mess things up between me and my favorite woman? He always responds with, or not me, I wouldn't do something like that. Are you trying to get me to respond in a way that scares or hurts my wife? I'm not even here. You are just making this up in your head. This shifts my body chemistry into warrior mode or protective mode. I now am highly motivated to create a productive and protective interaction between me and my wife in order to dominate the situation, instead of being dominated and finding myself in more pain after responding to the momentum with negative emotion. I have found this works as well when my wife, the original speaker, is out of balance as well. If I remember that she is human too, and Satan can torment her before I even show up, I can be helpful. Do not say, hey, I can tell you are losing a battle to Satan right now. That won't help. But what will help is to have the conversation above and shift your disposition to one of fighting for the life and liberty of your loved one, your wife. Be her hero. Stay close and strong and stable until your partner can feel it. Don't get defensive or elusive. Let your partner discover for themselves that they are in need of rebalancing. If it becomes abusive, politely withdraw. The other person will not validate your withdrawal at that time, but after things cool off, if they ever do, then validation will come.